Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Territories Talk. I am your co-host, Shaina Smith Archer, saying hello from the beautiful Virgin Islands. And with me, we have a full complement tonight. It's been a while since all three of us have been on, guys. So happy to see you all here, and I'm looking forward to a very informative and interesting conversation. Just want to say also a big shout out to our media partners. Let's make sure we slide them in real quick. Thank you to Cayman Marl Road Facebook page, Radio TCI, Montserrat, ZJB Radio, Virgin Islands, TBN Radio, FM 90.9, Bermuda's Channel 82, Radio Saba, PJFE FM 93.9, and Barbados CBC Channel 8. Thank you guys for helping us to continue to unify and inform our overseas territories family. So, Chris, how are things out in the Atlantic?
Cool. It's all get cool. It's full time. Good evening, everybody. It's good evening to our viewing public. It's full time in Bermuda. So, as you know, because we're geographically not in the Caribbean, we are subjected to rapid change. Not rapid, but gradual changes of temperature throughout from say October onwards. You start to we're down to like in the 60s right now.
Okay. And then our friend Shirley, she has her sweaters on, so she's probably even lower. Shirley, you're on mute. Shirley, you're on mute.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Excellent. Yes. I'm saying, yeah, it's way, way, way below 60 where I am. But the really good thing is that wherever we are, we stay in contact. We can still talk to each other. That's the best part of all of this for me. So yes, good evening. It's good to see you back on, Chris. We've missed you. You've been in the background, but we missed you on the screen.
I like when intelligent Black women tell me things like that.
All right, so Chris, without any further ado, introduce our honorable guest tonight.
So tonight we are extremely blessed. The topic tonight, I would let the guests say, but let me say, I have learned of this gentleman for a number of years and followed his work throughout what is done for the Caribbean people of Africa, people of color. And he readily agreed to be our guest tonight on this very important topic. Actually, the first time we're discussing this topic on this particular show. And I present to you Brother Stephen Golden, President of Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was founded by the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Greetings, Brother Stephen.
Greetings, Brother Famous. Good evening, ladies. Thanks for having me on the program.
Thank you.
I hope you're staying warm. It's even a little chilly here in Jamaica too, so they will tell you climate change is real, And another topic within the broader issue of reparations too, if you all have been paying attention to those linkages between climate change and the transatlantic slave trade and the drainage of wealth out of the Caribbean, which is interesting because, we have the hurricane season that follows the same route as that leg of the transatlantic trade. And even since we were children, I always used to hear it is the souls of the ancestors lashing out, So I'm happy to be here and glad to speak with you all. We need everybody on board when it comes to the reparation movement, particularly the territories, who are not yet independent, but still share our storied past and history when it comes to the trafficking and kidnapping and torture of Africans for over 3 centuries. So I'm happy to be here and welcome you all to the fight.
Thank you. I'm definitely looking forward to this
conversation. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll start at the beginning, Stephen, because before the program you were asking me, what's the conversation like here in the Virgin Islands if we're actively speaking about reparations? And I was saying we find that there's a lot of things that, through this show that we need to do more in-depth education on. So let's start first with what is reparations when we hear the words that and reparative justice. What is it that we're speaking about?
Well, it means to repair, really. It means accepting that some wrongs were committed and addressing those issues and whatever the lingering effects of it and trying to make right what was wrong instead of, hiding from our history, denying it or trying to bury it. As a former UK Prime Minister said, oh, it's in the past, just forget about it and move on. CARICOM has come alive in terms of the reparation fight over the last 10 years. The charge has been led by the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, who is chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Sir Hilary Beckles. He has called the 21st century the century of reparations. And so much has happened in the last decade, given the fact that reparation is not a new concept. And this is something I think needs to be heavily emphasized when it comes to educating people about the reparations movement. People have been talking about reparations even from during the time of enslavement. And there have been cases of reparations from the 16th century coming right up. So, what we see happening nowadays and the momentum that the reparation movement has been given is something that's a long time coming. And when we speak about the British Caribbean or CARICOM in particular, a lot of this was as a result of the 2015 tweet by the UK Chancery, by their Ministry of Finance, which alerted the public that Britain had just in 2015 paid off the debt on the loan that they had borrowed to compensate not the enslaved Africans at the time of abolition, but to compensate the slave owners.
Yeah.
And this is something we had known, but given the temperature and the time we are in, and the fact that it revealed that even our own West Indians and Caribbean folk who had been living in the UK from the time of the Windrush and before have been paying taxes basically to free their ancestors in the past, and that's a double whammy. That's a double whammy, especially in the face of the British narrative of how they abolished slavery. They gave you the sense that it was out of some sense of humanity, when really it was, even at the point of granting the emancipation, they were still thinking of our ancestors as chattel and property for which they had to compensate someone for in order to give them freedom. I mean, when you think about that, that's, these are the kind of issues that cause wars between nations, and as Marcus Garvey said, that the Negro race has never been a race of haters. We have always been lovers of humanity. And I find that just that issue in itself is also a testament to that, to our longevity, to our respect for humanity, for our love of peace. In fact, it is the experience of the African in the Americas and through the transatlantic trafficking and enslavement that we invented what the world now knows today as human rights. Think about it.
Yeah. Can I ask you the next question? When we talk about reparations, there are different aspects to reparations, and of course, a lot of time has been spent and still needs to be spent about the idea of what reparations means. You get money, you get services, but the aspect of reparations I don't hear much talk about, and that I think is really, really critical. And I'm speaking specifically from in the Montserrat context right now, because in Montserrat we have officials talk about the British government as benefactors. There's a sense, there's a very strong sense that we ought to be grateful for everything the British does for us. Every time they send us $1, every time they send somebody to help. And as a matter of fact, this afternoon I was looking at some of the submissions to the last committee request for information for thoughts on the constitutional agreements. And there was, in many of them, of the ones that I read, I haven't read them all, in many of the ones that I read, there was this notion of saying thank you to the British for helping us. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for allowing us to speak. And it, to be honest, it annoys me. It irritates me, because the idea of reparations at the psychological level is what I think is critical. Marcus Garvey was very, 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 very insistent that what happens in your mind is what's the most important. And we are not talking a whole lot about that. We talk about money for education and development, but the development and the education won't come until we do something about the psychological thing. So tell me, sir, how do you feel about that? What work is being done in terms of repairing our psychological damage?
Well, CARICOM has put forward a 10-point platform in terms of the areas that they feel reparation should address. And of course, public health and mental health is one of them. There are others, such as repatriation, such as transfer of technology. Number one is an apology, strengthening educational institutions, and strengthening, indigenous cultures. But, it's funny that you mentioned Marcus Garvey, because the quote that came to mind, and I'm sure what you were thinking of also, is that famous one that Bob Marley put music to, which says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. One of the important things when it comes to reparation is decolonizing our educational system, decolonizing the culture in terms of how we educate future generations. Right? Just the other day, I did a presentation at one of the primary schools here, dissecting the nursery rhymes that we have been teaching for generations. London Bridge is burning down. Why are we in Jamaica teaching children about London Bridge burning down? Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, which was about a notorious pirate that kept escaping from the Tower of London. Right? Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Right, which is about Mary, Queen of Scots, and that whole internal struggle for the throne, and at one point her affection for the French guillotine and lopping people's heads off. And what I said to them is that we really should be saying, not London Bridge is falling down, but Timbuktu is going up. We shouldn't be saying Mary, Mary, quite contrary. I instead teach them to sing Nanny, Nanny, quite uncanny. Where did the redcoats go, right? I give you that example to show you that even from the early childhood stage, right up to our O levels and A levels and into university, we have a curriculum whose narrative has been designed and driven by the very same people who trafficked, enslaved, and brutalized our ancestors. And the only way a minority plantocracy could keep a majority of enslaved people under the whip was by psychological manipulation. And so you find, as Martin Luther King said, when we were brought over here, we were robbed of our history, robbed of our culture, robbed of our language. Malcolm X himself said, who taught us to hate ourselves from the top of our heads to the soles of our feet, right? And this is what enslavement and colonization has done. So we need to start talking about decolonizing our educational curriculum, decolonizing certain parts of our culture. Madam, you're a former speaker of a house. I was one of the people here in Jamaica insisting and lambasting our own house speaker when he put on that ridiculous wig. And saying,
listen, I was in office at the time. We took personally, I laughed with him at him.
So, and the funny thing is, the Speaker of the House was my own uncle at the time. We have to understand that 300 years is a long time. I mean, the world is up in arms when they talk about the Jewish Holocaust, and you have to be careful how you speak about it. You can't even insinuate that you are anything less than abhorred by it and in agreement with how terrible it was. But that Holocaust didn't even last a decade, right? Compare 9 years, compare 10 years to 300 years, right? It's incomparable. So they've had a long time to program us. They've had a long time to divide and conquer us. They have had a long time to conduct a dastardly social experiment as they separated us from our parents, traded us from one place to the other, first made it illegal for us to be made literate, right? And then at the point that they chose to begin to teach us to read and write, they were in full control of the literature that we read. And it had enough time had passed that we had forgotten the stories of those first generations of prisoners of war who came over, who they tried to enslave, but who refused and resisted enslavement, and formed the first African communities in the Americas, which the Europeans have called Maroons or Palenques or Quilombos, depending on which part of the Americas you're in, Seminoles in the United States, right? So our history is long, but at the same time, we must be honest in realizing the damage that has been done to us. And it's not something that we're going to be able to undo in 10 years either. But we have to begin and we have to start somewhere. So, you know, that's why I give you the example of even the nursery rhymes we teach to our children. Even the fact that one of my nursery rhymes says Timbuktu is going up instead of London Bridge is falling down. You know, in Jamaica, when you say Timbuktu, it conjures up thoughts of being lost, some far off place where you may never come back from. How did that come into the culture? When the facts is that Timbuktu was one of the first university cities in West Africa, right? This is, you know, Mansa Musa, who was one of the richest, they say the richest man who ever lived, invested so much in bringing scholars from across the world and across the continent of Africa, concentrating them into Timbuktu. Several schools, such as the Sankore schools, were built. Many scrolls were brought in there. It was a seat and place of learning and wisdom. In fact, those navigators who helped Christopher Columbus find his way to the Americas, right, were Moors who had the benefit of a Timbuktu-based education, right? But we don't teach our children that. We teach London Bridge is falling down.
And I think, you know, just to lend to what Shirley is explaining, just this week we had a conversation here. I was saying to a relative, she was asking, you know, why don't we know more about our history? In terms of the Virgin Islands, we just named, you know, 10 national heroes this month, you know, and for me in my 40s, I feel so disenfranchised in terms of nothing was ever done in terms of recognizing who we are as a people, where we come from, even all the way back to the continent through the education system. And it is something where we have to be more intentional about the content. We inherited the system and somehow we felt that because of where it came from, it means that, you know, it's right. So we're going to continue to go with it, not realizing we're actually disenfranchising ourselves and done it to other generations now for several years. So there's so much. What concerns me also in our context here, again, is where it was last year, where we had the threat of suspension of our constitutional portions of the constitutional order as it relates to the elected government, you know, and people were actually, you know, saying, yes, this is what's needed because we need to be told what to do. We need to be governed. We can't govern ourselves, you know, because that's the narrative that has basically become so much a part of our thinking that it's hard for us to have a different vision. And that's what I was saying to a friend today when I shared with him that this would be the topic today. You know, I find it very challenging, but I understand it's a generational thing. You know, those that came up under the monarchy were all saddened and distraught when, you know, the Queen passed last year. But for some of us, it's like, you know, why do we even still have a monarchy system?
How many African monarchs passed away last year and you never heard anything about that, right? Some of them perhaps your own distant relatives. It's interesting though that you bring up the issue of constitution, because Jamaica is in the midst of a constitutional reform process. And one of the things we've been focusing on is educating people on the history of the Constitution, as it concerns our history as African people in Jamaica. So, you know, we have a bicameral Westminster system with a lower house and an upper house that is appointed by the Prime Minister and by the leader of the opposition. I'm sure the same might hold true for some of your own governmental structures. And I have to be reminding Jamaicans that, listen, remember that Jamaica has had an assembly since 1667, since the 17th century, right? And at first, it was an assembly appointed by the British governor. Then the planters fought, you know, the planters decided that they would elect their own assemblymen, but the governor still kept control of the executive arm of government, right? And for 200 odd years, it was illegal for even for Africans to vote, whether you were 100% African or mixed blood African. It took 200 years for the mixed Africans and Europeans, what they call the colored people at one time, fight and fight and fight to get the right to vote and to get the right to represent the population in that assembly. And then it took a few more decades before Black people were allowed to, right? And at one point in between that struggle, Britain suspended our constitution also, right? After what is called the Morant Bay Rebellion. Really, it was the Morant Bay Revolution in Jamaica, which started over the issue of the right to own land, of property taxes being used as a barrier to keep Black people from exercising suffrage. And when the people erupted, the governor didn't know how to deal with it. The infamous Governor Eyre, who decided to declare martial law and execute the leaders. They even executed one member of parliament, one member of the House of Representatives, who is now recognized as one of our national heroes, the Right Excellent George William Gordon. And the reason Gordon was executed is that he had been born colored, right? His mother had been enslaved. His father was a plantation lawyer and administrator who would go from plantation to plantation and sort out the books. And every time he came to this particular plantation, he would request this enslaved African girl to keep him company at night, right? She got pregnant. He didn't recognize that son until the son showed some ability. And at the age of 12, decided to legitimize, invested in his education. That son later became a member of parliament, but he never forgot that he grew up amongst the enslaved. And so he used his position to advance the cause of the African in the assembly. They didn't like this. And so they fought him out of the parliament after one term, as if to say, this is what you do with your privilege. We give you colored boys the right to vote and to come into the assembly. You want to fight for the Negroes? Off with you. He took a few years, joined the Native Baptist Church, incidentally, which was brought to Jamaica by George Liele, an African-American who sided with the British against the Americans in the Revolutionary War when they offered freedom to the Africans who fought on their side. But unfortunately, they lost the war and ended up having to evacuate those Africans. One of them, I mean, many of them, but this one in particular ended up in Jamaica, started the Baptist church here. George William Gordon joined the Baptist church, which was a church congregation made up predominantly of Africans, right? And in assessing how we could help them advance their rights as citizens, decided himself to buy land, cut it up, issue them titles, pay the taxes on those titles so that they would have the right to vote. When the governor realized what he was doing, they didn't reprimand him after the Morant Bay Revolution. They drew him from his house in St. Andrew. He was nowhere near the rebellion, quote unquote. Tried him in a military court and executed him. He is our only member of parliament to have been executed by the state, and he was executed for showing Africans a way that they could challenge the system and exercise their rights. Because of what he did, Britain didn't want to take any chance. Even after executing him, they suspended self-governance in Jamaica for 2 decades, between 1865 and 1885, before it came back, right? And each step of the way, the governor has sought to keep control. Even as they give black people, okay, you can pay taxes and vote. Then in 1944, okay, everybody has the right to vote. What they have done is kept a compartment within governance to maintain control. Hence, we have an upper house that is not elected by the people, but was appointed by the governor. And after independence, that control was handed over to the political parties, right? Who now exercise the same sort of power that the governor did when it comes to governance in this country. And one of my messages to the people during this time of constitutional reform is that each time we have challenged and reformed the Constitution, it has been to give more power to the people. And it's a fight that has taken us 200-300 years from 1667 coming up to adult suffrage. When we reform it now, demonstrate to us how we are giving more power to the people. And it's one of the reasons I've said that the upper house of senators must be given suffrage. The people must be allowed to elect their representatives in the upper house, and no more of this appointment from no governor or from no political party. Of course, they don't like to hear that, I'll be honest, because the purpose of a political party is to get power and to keep power, not to give power to the people.
Yeah.
Can I
switch a little bit and ask you something about relationships between the UNIA? Because when we talk about reparations, I mean, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we see Africa, right? There are all sorts of emotions and perspectives amongst us about what our relationship should be with Africa and what Africa's relationship should be with us in this question of reparations. The counter story to our drive for reparations and for acknowledgement and, if you want a better term, the return of our humanity, is that, well, the Africans sold you to, they didn't do it by themselves. The Europeans didn't do it by themselves. So what I want to ask is, what's your relationship of the UNIA and other organizations who are working on reparations with, for example, the African Union or specific African countries?
We have a great relationship with the African Union. In fact, the UNIA division in Jamaica hosted the AU chairman in 2018, was it? And we also have several divisions across the African continent, including countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. But I want to address something you said, because, you know, it's a part of that colonial narrative that was placed there to keep the divisions, right? They did the same thing with the African kingdoms I refer to that they call Maroons by signing a treaty with them. But one of the caveats of the treaty was that they had to defend the country when called upon, and they also had to return those quote unquote runaway slaves after the treaty signing, which naturally they did not do unless it was a high profile runaway that the governor was looking for. And then at which point you cannot risk going to war again for one or two particular Africans. But that narrative that Africans sold us, and I've heard people take it as far as, well, we should get reparations from them too.
Exactly.
Or they owe us an apology. Absolute rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute rubbish. And let me explain why. The crime against humanity when it comes to the European slave trade, right? They like to use the fancy word transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
But let's call it what it was. It was the European slave trade, right? The Arab slave trade in Africa is another issue that we'll deal with later.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the European slave trade, they introduced a system of slavery that had not existed on earth before. That system is chattel slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It is the only form of slavery that begins to dehumanize the enslaved, that allows you to will a being to future generations and to keep them in slavery in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
It is the only system that enslaves the fetus within the womb of a woman before the child is even born. That never existed on earth, no time at all before the European slave trade. Slavery in Africa was a part of our penal system.
Mm-hmm.
Understand this. And it's hard when you look back from this time, because if you don't think about it deeply enough, Africa never built prisons. There was no Tower of London in Africa. We didn't build buildings to lock up people and feed them for the rest of their life. That was not how we punished crimes. Slavery was a means of punishment for crimes. Either you were a prisoner of war, that meaning we had fought against each other, you lost. I can't trust you to have you walking around the city. So I got to lock you up and sell you, right? I have to get rid of you. Or you committed a crime and we didn't want you around the society anymore. We sold you into slavery. Now, when you were sold into slavery at that point, you were bought by some other tribe and you served a period based on how much was spent for you, right? You served a period where that was earned back by the person who bought you. And then you were absorbed into that tribe. Your children who might be born while you were enslaved were not
slaves.
Born slaves. They were born as free members of that tribe. How do we know this? There are several stories within the European own narrative that show you, and this even further gives you clarity about how criminal their actions were. There were quote unquote African slave traders, and we know African slave traders were just conducting normal transactions for their tribe. We have prisoners of war, we have criminals. What do? We take them to the slave market. Some of those slave traders, when they brought their slaves to market, they never came back. You know why? The Europeans whacked them over the head and threw them in with the cargo too. That was a crime. That was a violation on every level. Some of these include one of Jamaica's own heroes, not national hero, but folk heroes, called Chief Tachi, who was known to have trafficked in slaves in Africa, was tricked, ended up on a slave ship, ended up in Jamaica. And when he saw from the slave ship to the shore how these Europeans conducted this whole business of slavery, how the enslaved were treated, how they were brutalized, he ended up leading one of the biggest quote-unquote slave insurrections in Jamaica, known as the Easter Rebellion. And he is not the only one with that story, right? So it shows you that even the very people who they say were selling us, when they were brought into the situation, it was a complete culture shock. They did not understand what they were sending the African into. They had no concept of chattel slavery. It's the reason why the Europeans had forts on the coast of Africa, so that they could insulate themselves with their slaves before they sent them out to sea. Africans didn't live within those forts. They didn't see the brutalization that was about to take place, right? Africa is not the only place to have experienced slavery. And Black people should not be out there acting as if we're the only people. In fact, the very word slave comes from the term Slavic, which refers to Eastern European people who were enslaved by the Mongols and others before that time, right? This idea that to equate slavery in Africa with European slavery is the first thing that we gloss over, and it is the biggest mistake we can make in teaching our history. They're two different things. Slavery is not a crime against humanity when it was being used as a penal system. You committed a crime, you did something wrong, you paid your penance by being sold into slavery for a time. Or if your crime was hard enough that you died in slavery, well, you committed that crime. Did you not? Right? Slave trade in Africa violated that. And we have proof. The first African kingdom to engage with the Europeans in terms of slavery was the Congo Kingdom. Not what we know as modern day Congo today, but really located in what would be modern day Angola. The King of Congo in the early 1500s wrote a letter to the King of Portugal saying, your slave traders are violating our agreement. They're running around kidnapping people who we have not sold to them, right? They've even kidnapped one of my own nephews, and you need to find him wherever he is in Brazil and send him back over. And the King of Portugal capitulated. That letter also said in bold language, send no more slave traders. And so when Europe began to meet that resistance, when Africans resisted that, what they did was find a tribe who was vexed with you, near enough that you may have conquered in the past and want to reconquer you now, and began to trade guns with them. These guns created wars that created more prisoners of wars unnecessarily. And beyond that, the slave trade became like a drug trade. So that warring various tribes themselves took it upon themselves to either create wars or kidnap Africans from other tribes because of the wealth that the slave trade was generating. But even they themselves still only had a concept of slavery that was born in Africa and as it was done in Africa. So even they themselves did not know what they were sending our ancestors to. And this is very important to understand, right? And even when I find hard-headed Caribbean people who are like, well, I'm not African and they did this to me, I also remind them of the flip side. Europe did not colonize Africa until after the abolition of slavery in 1834 and even in Brazil in 1884, which was one of the last, right? And at the same time that they did that, the Conference of Berlin took place in Germany, when Africa was pieced up and parceled and divided up amongst themselves. And they then turned their attention to conquering the continent. And who helped them? People forget that the British West Indies regiment, made up of the descendants of Africans who had been taken into slavery, fired guns and killed Africans for the British. They fought the Ashanti in 1911. They conquered many kingdoms for the Europeans. So if we over here are going to begin pointing fingers saying, well, you sold us, they can point fingers and say, well, you invaded us too. So better we leave that alone to understand that we were all, both of us, manipulated by the mastermind Europeans to do their bidding. And we don't need to accept no responsibility for that. I'm not asking no African country to pay reparations because my own ancestors helped to subdue them and colonize them and rob them of their diamonds and their golds and so forth. And it wasn't even to our benefit. It was a part of the colonial brainwashing of white supremacy that some of us still suffer under today.
This is very deep, and I think it's something where, again, because we lack knowledge, the Bible tells us that people without knowledge, they perish, and they want to set you across the Atlantic against each other. So I was happy this year when I saw the conversation now shifted and saying, we are our brother's keeper and we need to come together if we're going to fight this war and actually win it, because it is something, as you pointed out earlier, been a long-standing conversation that, you know, persons was just want to brush it aside and say, hey, that's the past, let's move forward, forget about it. But, you know, for me too, when we start to understand global politics, because that's one of the other things that we want to make sure that we bring out tonight, that, you know, first world, second world, and third world order is something that persons are working feverishly even now in the 21st century to make sure that it's maintained, because it was established from back then for a reason. You know, somebody always wants to be on top and be able to dictate and control to the rest of us, and we're supposed to feel good about that, you know, and not want to make movements in terms of, we may be asking, I think the figure I heard on a podcast I was listening to last night was $33 trillion. But, you know, how that is used now in terms of
$33 trillion in terms of the British.
I think that was the for the European, in terms of overall European colonial, and how that will be used to help us advance ourselves as our region, and, you know, again, back into the continent, to move forward as a people, because, you know, this world order that we're contending with is a lot bigger than what it is we tend to understand. So emphasize for us what it is that we really trying to accomplish when we're saying we want to have reparations. It's not just 40 acres and a mule. That was, you know, would have been a couple 100 years ago. What is it that we need to see happen now?
No, we want that too, you know. We want
the Americans didn't get it either.
Yeah, because, you know, that was skullduggery and fraud and trickery. And I want your viewers who are listening carefully to understand that it's not only the British who compensated their slave owners. The Americans did it also. The French extracted from the Haitians that same amount that they had calculated the value of their chattel was. You know, Haiti held out for a while, but with the blockade and various other methods that was supported by the United States against Haiti, they eventually had to capitulate. The Portuguese, the Spanish, everybody gave some form of compensation to the slave owners and had no regard for the enslaved. Because really in their minds at that time, we were not human beings. It is the black man and the black woman in the America who has written the history and definition of human rights as the world knows it today. And we should never forget that. Never, ever forget that. I got to plug in this laptop real quick. So run some interference for me there, Chris.
All right. I think we had, Chris, you had a PowerPoint that we could show.
There's something up here.
Yeah.
Yes. Tonight is definitely a lesson, a history lesson. So this is our brother Stephen during the CARICOM meeting in Jamaica in 2018. The leaders of the Caribbean were showing an exhibit of, I guess you say, artifacts from slavery days, chains, neck things that they used to put around the slave. So in this particular picture, you will see this on the extreme right. You would see our guest Stephen Goulding, and in the center, this lady goes without introduction. The Honorable Mia Amour Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. This was her first CARICOM meeting as a Prime Minister. And to the extreme left is the now deceased president of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse. He was actually the former chairman of CARICOM, and he was handed over to the chairmanship over to Honorable Holiness of Jamaica. So this is a historic picture because this is one of the last pictures that we have of Jovenel Moïse.
You know, it's so interesting you that President Moise at in that conversation we had at that conference was asking for the National Council of Reparations in Jamaica to come to Haiti to help organize a reparation council there for him. We never got a chance to take up that offer, but it is certainly something that weighs heavily on my mind. And we're looking for every and any opportunity to engage with the Haitians on this topic.
Yeah, so talk to us about Haiti. Let me just jump, because $33 trillion couldn't even cover the damage they've done to Haiti alone. The condition that Haiti is in right now, the struggles, the interference, the constant interference in Haiti, the perpetual inability of Haitians to regroup and catch themselves in their own country is not, there's no dollar value that can be put on it. There's no dollar value that can be put on any of this. But so how Haiti, for me, I get emotional when I talk about Haiti, because Haiti, I mean, they, again, just like the British just paid off their loan not so long ago. Haiti has been paying over and over and over again. And just the other day, they finally got out from under that. But all the international interference that keeps bearing down on Haiti alone. How can we make the idea of reparations so clearly? You can't simplify it, but how do we take the emotion maybe out of it so people can just be logical and objective and get us to a place? Because I've been in conversations with people and after it just breaks down because people just go crazy. It's still too raw. How do we get past that?
Let me first of all say that reparation is not just about the dollar amount. The dollar amount is a major part of it, but we're not saying that is going to fix all the problems, right? The Universal Negro Improvement Association, when it was under the leadership of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, is the first organization to bring the issue of reparations to the governing world body, which was then a young League of Nations. Of course, they failed and had to remodel themselves as the United Nations. But it is on the record that Garvey, at that conference in Versailles, when the League of Nations came together in 1919, sent representatives of the African race to question and to put before them the issue of reparations for Africa. He even went as far as declaring that the colonies that they had confiscated from the Germans who had lost the First World War should be handed over to Africans in the diaspora as part of a repatriation program. They refused to seat his delegate, saying that they represented no particular nation, right? Meaning that if you weren't one of the colonizing Europeans of Africa, you had no right to sit at a table that claimed to be a League of Nations, right? That's the first thing. So when they did that, Garvey then called his own International Convention of the Negro People of the World and created a document known as the Declaration of Rights of the Negro People of the World. 54 articles. One of them declared the League of Nations null and void for its non-recognition of the African, for its non-recognition of the Negro race, which is the oldest branch of the human family, right? But it also declared that Black people should have the right to free education forever and for their posterity and forever. In case I didn't say that again, forever. Secondly, that Black people should have the right to travel around the world unmolested. Of course, at the time when they wrote that, they were paying first-class fares to travel in third-class conditions, right? Because of the practice of Jim Crow in the United States or apartheid in South Africa, whatever you want to call it. It was discrimination against the black race, right? So I offer that as an example to say that money is not going to be the solution. There's going to have to be some policies crafted at the world stage that are reparative policies. For example, right now, we can't travel to Africa without passing through Europe or America if we're coming from the islands here. In fact, we don't even have to go that far. I can't even travel down to some of these, to Montserrat, without having to fly up to Miami or somewhere to come back around, to go up, to go down, to back. Right? These things are ridiculous. So when we talk about the reparation movement, and when the world is prepared to come to terms with the fact that reparations must be paid, these are the various policies which we must craft. When it comes to Haiti, there are a number of issues that we're going to have to contend with. Even as CARICOM neighbors, people forget, that, and as we talk about constitutional reform, Haiti drafted a constitution in 1804. In that constitution, it said any African who could reach the shores of Haiti would, one, be free, because we know that if you're reaching the shores of Haiti, you're probably coming from slavery somewhere, because it was all around, whether up north, cross center, or down south at that time. And secondly, you would automatically be given citizenship, right? A number of enslaved Jamaicans took that up. In fact, remember the Stono Rebellion in North or South Carolina in the United States, led by Gabriel Prosser. His intention was to free the enslaved Africans and free his family, put them in a boat and head to Haiti, right? And that's just one case. So again, it boils down to the colonial narrative and education that we get. I never learned these things in school. I never learned this while I was learning about London Bridge falling down. I did not know that Haiti had extended that arm of freedom to Africans everywhere and guaranteed citizenship. Now I live in a country that every couple of months we're hearing another boatload of Haitians arrive. And the government is trying to figure out what to do with them, if they should be deported or not, as if that should even be questioned, as if we should even consider that. It is because, as Marcus Garvey says, that people without knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture will be like a tree without roots. And a tree without roots is a dead, floating driftwood. Right? If we had an appreciation of that history, we would have different policies. And so when it comes to reparative policies and reparation and crafting policies, both on a governmental level, on a regional level, on an international level, education is important, knowing our history is important, and honoring our ancestors, because this reparation is for them as much as it is for us. Honoring what they went through by, one, not forgetting and always remembering, and two, furthering the fight. So when I say it's not just about money, it's going to be about a lot of things. It's going to be about our reconnection with Africa. It's going to be about our inheritance in Africa once we get Africa organized and its resources and its wealth back into the hands of Africans, right? We will have to share in that too. And that will have to be brought to bear on addressing some of the situations such as Haiti, as the former speaker is mentioning.
Shaina, I have a question here. Can I just, I know we're running short on time, but I have a question here which is very interesting, because Stephen, you talked about reparations for everybody, all of the different people who have been enslaved around the world. Now, one gentleman here from Montserrat says, but he talked about the complication of reparations. One of them is that the indigenous people of the Caribbean must be reparated as well. And if the indigenous people are to be given reparations, then they must be given back their lands, etc. And the descendants of the chattel slave would have to be paid out but won't have lands, what would they then do? Go back to Africa with the reparation money?
Here is the issue with the indigenous people. When you say indigenous people, who are you referring to? The Taínos?
I think that's what it is. Yes,
the Caribs, the Garifuna. We are the indigenous people, and I'll tell you why. Remember I mentioned earlier those African kingdoms of the Americas? Couple of things I want to drop on you, because I know time is of the essence. I spoke about slavery in Africa and not comparing it to European slavery, right? Because there's not one recorded slave uprising in Africa. Never been. There was no Spartacus in Africa. But within 30 years of enslaved Africans being trafficked to the Americas, the first recorded quote-unquote slave uprising took place on Christopher Columbus's nephew's plantation in Hispaniola, right? Diego Don Colon, right? 1522. That's 100 years ago last year, right? First slave uprising. These Africans who torched the plantation, slew the masters if they could find them. What did they do after that? They took off into the interior of the islands. How did they survive in the interior of the islands? Who did they encounter in the interior of the islands? The indigenous people. It was the indigenous people who showed them where to find water, where to find food, where to find medicine, what paths take you through the mountains quicker. And this is how they were able to lead successive wars against the enslavers. Jamaica was not the only country to have Maroons. Maroons existed everywhere Africans were enslaved. And as I said earlier, in Colombia and Venezuela, they call their communities palenques. In Brazil, they call them quilombos, right? The Haitian Revolution was led not by Toussaint Louverture. Jean-Jacques Dessalines was trained by a Maroon warrior queen known as Adrabaya, who was an enslaved Amazon warrior from Dahomey who knew about warfare, right? And I give you that example to show you that those indigenous people that the first set of Africans encountered, who were necessary for them to be able to navigate the lands and to become one with the land so that they could successfully fight against slavery. Their generations became intermingled. They had children. So when we mustn't think like Europeans now, you know. When we begin to try to separate indigenous people from Africans, that's another European narrative and mistake. Remember when Christopher Columbus came here, they told him he wasn't the first to come by sea. I'm not making this up. It's in his own diaries. Check it. The indigenous people he met told him he was not the first to come by sea, but that those who had come before him were of dark skin, and that they traded spears with silver and gold tips. Mansa Musa came to the throne in Mali because Abu Bakr II abdicated the throne. Which emperor, which king of kings abdicates a throne? And we would have never known of Mansa Musa. But the emperor before him abdicated the throne. Why? To take 200 ships across the Atlantic. These are the people that the indigenous people were telling Columbus about. So those are our people. We've been trading with them long time. We've been having babies with them long time. And slavery just compounded it worse and made our bond even that stronger, right? Because now it's you're hard pressed to find a purely indigenous Taino in the Caribbean. There are some, don't get me wrong, but that bloodline has long been intermingled. And we're talking about Africans from 300-400 years ago. How are they not indigenous 300-400 years later? Everybody comes from Africa, even Europeans. We forget that.
We would need another hour.
Another 2 or 3 hours, Shaina.
But I'm happy that we started the conversation tonight, because it's definitely something that, again, as the overseas territories, we don't need to be sitting on the sideline and watching what's happening in, around us in the region and even globally, but that we start to educate ourselves and start to build our understanding as it relates to, what this means for all of us and the importance of it. So, we're out of time, but Brother Golden, thank you for being here.
And I was really enjoying myself. I got to tell you.
So
yes, I saw that.
with you guys.
We will definitely have you back for a part 2 and a part 3, because again, there's so much history that you brought out tonight that I heard for the first time, and I'm sure others will. You, and if you was listening to us via radio, definitely go to our Facebook page or the YouTube channel. I shared some links of videos as well as the YouTube channel for UNIA. Again, thank you to all our media sponsors.
And please follow us at UNIA Jamaica on Instagram. Please, I want you. My members tell me I don't do this enough, and they want to see our numbers up. So at UNIA Jamaica, I did it.
All right, we will do that. Chris, any last words?
I don't think they got first word. This was sitting at the feet of the master. I just want to say, I sent a WhatsApp to Brother Stephen, and he readily agreed. Like, wasn't no like, oh, let me think about it. Oh, he says yes.
No, man, I need my Bermudian brothers in the fight too. You guys are the final component. All these territories, that's the tsunami that's going to hit them if they don't answer properly.
Right. So, like I said, we'll talk off air, but the point I want to get at is that everything happens in its time, right? That the people are waking up ye mighty race, accomplish what you will. Black people don't know themselves until the backs against the wall. I grew up on the teachings of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, right? So I say all that to say, for us in Bermuda, who's the furthest north of the Caribbean islands, thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you did tonight. We'll talk, my brother.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure. Hopefully see you all soon and again.
Yes, soon and again. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks and praises, and over to you, ladies.
All right. Well, again, thank you to all our viewers or listeners, wherever you are around the region. We've had, even in the diaspora in the US, our audience keeps expanding.
That's
so
awesome,
we're really grateful for everyone that's a part of the movement that has become Territories Talk, and we will continue to bring you those interesting topics again to continue to inform and unite our overseas territories family. Have a good evening.
All right.